Hello there. I'm sorry. Hello there. Hi, that's better. That's okay. You guys have a good second day? Day 2 under your belts? It's great. I'm glad to hear that. Plenty of iced coffee? Plenty of oat milk? We're all good? Okay. Got to keep the stock going. That's good. Here we are for our second faculty event of our second annual Queer Week, which we're very excited about. Tonight we're going to hear from poet Cameron Awkward-Rich, writer Melissa Febos, and artist Ilana Savdie. We're very excited about that. It's a great lineup. Before we get started, though, a couple of things. First of all, over in the lounge a little while ago, cleaning up, and I looked at the sign-up list for Thursday, and I was very encouraged. Many people have signed up. We're on page 2. That's awesome. So big hand for you all. And if you haven't signed up yet, I will again urge you to do so. You won't be sorry. You're going to have a great time, and you will be amply rewarded. And you'll be giving the gift of your work to everyone else in the room. So if you haven't signed up, head on over there to do so. Tomorrow, a reminder, we're doing something new. We're doing a brown bag lunch at 12:30, free and open to the public. Laura Shabbat, who is a longtime and beloved member of the fall community, is going to give a talk and a slide presentation on the history of Provincetown as an artist community. So she does a great job. She knows the material inside and out. It's really interesting, and she's hilarious besides. So if you want to go over to Farland, get yourself a sandwich, come back, and about 12:30, it'll be a really interesting talk. I encourage you to check it out. Let's see what else. We have printed copies of the material that Cameron and Melissa are going to read at the back in large print. If that would help you enjoy the evening more, please head on back and we can set you up with that. We also have cushions. If you have not already grabbed one for yourself and you want one, we have big containers of cushions back there, and we also have assisted listening devices. If that would make the evening more enjoyable for anybody in the room, just ask Sarah or Fatima and they'll hook you up. Yes, both Cameron and Melissa's books will be at the back for sale after the event, and also they will be signing their books after the event, so be sure to do that. And check out the gallery if you haven't already done so. How many of you are bored by me saying this for like the 3rd or 4th time? You good? Okay, that's nice. Well, thank you. Okay, I'm going to start over and do a really detailed version. There is a marvelous exhibition, if you haven't been here before this summer, wonderful exhibition curated by former fellow Matt Bollinger, featuring work by former fellows. It's terrific. Check it out. As always, a shout out of gratitude to the East End Books for managing our bookstore. And also a shout out to the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod and the Cape Cod 5 Foundation for generously supporting our public programming in the summer. Restrooms are still down the hall, and cell phones, turn them off. And so without further ado, enough of that stuff, I would like to invite to the stage one of Melissa's students to introduce Melissa. Please, Courtney Kirsten, please come on up to introduce Melissa.
You said my last name right. You said it. You did a really good job. Thank you. That was great. Okay, can you hear me? Beautiful. I'm so excited to be able to introduce Melissa Febos this evening. So this past winter, I had the opportunity to take a workshop with Melissa through corporeal writing. Does anybody know what corporeal writing is? Yeah, it's a great writing collective in Portland, Oregon. They put on workshops and like art adjacent classes in person and on Zoom. And so I was in a workshop with Melissa over Zoom. It was like the biggest workshop on Zoom I've ever been in. There were like 200 people in this Zoom room. And at the end of the workshop, there was the opportunity to ask Melissa some questions. And so someone asked the question, it was something like, writing creative nonfiction can be really difficult because we're writing about ourselves, we're writing about things that can be uncomfortable, and it can be really taxing. And so how do you take care of yourself? And then how can we as writers also take care of ourselves? And so Melissa gave a great answer about how she takes care of herself, and then also some suggestions and ideas about how other people can take care of themselves. But before she gave her answer, this is what she said. She said, "I am sensitive." And so for me, hearing her say that totally awakened something within me. I had never in my entire life heard someone use the word sensitive or talk about sensitivity in a way that was simply neutral. And I didn't realize about how much shame I had carried with that word, with me throughout my life. So for instance, when I was very young, my parents took me to some therapists with the idea of like toughening me up, and I definitely carried that idea of ridding myself of my sensitivity into adulthood. But hearing Melissa say that word, not in the sense of something pejorative or disgraceful, but as something natural to the human condition that deserved to be tended to and nurtured, put me on the journey towards reclaiming that word for myself in a way that I hadn't been able to before. So for me, this sense of recovering and honoring what we often see as shameful or something that cannot be spoken is characteristic of Melissa's work and teaching. As she says in her book, Body Work, quote, "Almost everything I've ever written started with a secret, with the fear that my subject was unspeakable," unquote. For it is within speaking these secrets that we rid ourselves of the fear that, as Melissa says, we are alone in them. Beyond its artistry, what I most admire about Melissa's work is that it is a reminder of how, through art, there is the possibility for healing and transformation as we share testimonies of how we have survived trauma and discomfort, and we invite readers to envision the same possibilities of endurance for themselves. Melissa's work ultimately shows us that through writing and art making, there is liberation. And what a beautiful thing to bring to the Fine Arts Work Center. Melissa Febos is the author of 4 books, including the nationally best-selling essay collection Girlhood, which has been translated into 7 languages and was a Lambda Literary Award finalist, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award in Criticism, and named a Notable Book of the Year by NPR, Time, The Washington Post, and others. Her craft book, Body Work, was also named a national bestseller and an LA Times bestseller and an Indie Next Pick. Her 5th book, The Dry Season, is forthcoming from Alfred A. Knopf. The recipient of a 2002 Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship, a 2022, sorry, I think I said 2002 before. Both of those are 2022. A 2022 National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship, and the Jean Cordova Nonfiction Award from Lambda Literary, Melissa's work has appeared in publications including the Paris Review, the New Yorker, the Sun, the Kenyon Review, Tin House, Granta, The Believer, McSweeney's, the New York Times Magazine, The Guardian, Elle, and Vogue. Her essays have won prizes from Prairie Schooner, Story Quarterly, the Sewanee Review, and others. She is a 4-time MacDowell Fellow and has also received fellowships from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, the Vermont Studio Center, the Barbara Denning Memorial Foundation, the BAU Institute at the Camargo Foundation, the British Library, the Black Mountain Institute, the Ragdale Foundation, and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, which named her the 2018 recipient of the Sarah Verdun Writing Award. The recipient of an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College, she is a full professor at the University of Iowa, where she teaches in the nonfiction writing program. Please welcome Melissa Febos.
Thank you so much, Courtney. That was such a beautiful introduction. Got the long bio from the website. No, that was really, really beautiful. And as you were talking about sensitivity as sort of a neutral quality, I was thinking about how it's a good thing for me in spaces like this where I feel like I'm among family and it's safe to be affected by things, you know? And I felt very affected by things, particularly the work of my students this week. And we also had we were talking a little bit today in class about how it can be sort of mortifying to just name things. And so that's what I'm gonna do with this reading, which is some new writing about the old days. It is the opening to the dry season, which is coming out in a little less than a year. There is this woman on my flight to London. I see her 4 rows behind me, tousled hair in a wool beanie, leather boots belonging to the category worn only by lesbians and Dickensian orphans, giant backpack. I feel myself begin to glow with a chemistry visible only to the object of my attention. I don't understand the biological protocol that enacts once it's triggered, but I do know that more often than not, if I follow it, the end result is sex, and if my past is any indication, some sort of romantic entanglement. Just a few months earlier, I would have lurched at the call, but I am halfway through a year-long promise to myself to stay celibate. In the first months, I was more vulnerable to the familiar siren song of a cute dyke, though I'd managed to stay the course. The editor, the fancy book party, the trans film director, all the loose ends and rain checks with whom I'd cut off contact months ago. But here I am, turning my profile to the angle mathematically most likely for her to see me, rolling my shirt cuffs up to bear a few inches of forearm tattoos, dangling my hand with its short, unvarnished nails into the aisle. Content warning, pornography. Like most femmes, I am an expert at signaling my queerness through physical cues legible only to other queers. I can communicate my sexual identity through the set of my shoulders if I need to. I sit in the cramped airplane seat with my legs comfortably spread, my elbows on both armrests, exuding a physical entitlement to the space I occupy. So much of heterosexual attraction is contingent on the minimization and infantilization of the female body. Crossed legs, tilted heads, widened eyes, slackened mouths. A disregard for this affect suggests that a woman's desires lie elsewhere. This is why it's so easy to mistake some women who have gone through menopause for lesbians. They have both stopped giving a fuck what men think of them. This secret language and all its permutations drove and defined over 2 decades of my life. I finally gotten comfortable in my abstinence from it. But then I think, we're on a flight to London and unlikely to come any closer to one another than the 4 rows of seats now between us. There's no harm in indulging the pleasure of the dance. We land at London Gatwick and the attractive stranger gathers her belongings, runs a hand through her messy hair, and yes, glances in my direction before she rises to her feet and steps into the aisle. Goodbye, stranger, I think with some relief. To my great surprise, these past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. It wasn't happiness exactly that I sought in celibacy. I had just gotten so tired. I met my first girlfriend when I was 15 and spent the next 20 years in relationships. There were a few brief periods of singleness, but I was never alone, really. Once I reached my 30s, I started having moments of unease when I contemplated this pattern. I was just a relationship person, I told myself. I had spent my happiest times partnered, I thought, without considering the givenness of that, having spent most of my life partnered. I was reassured by the fact that I never felt afraid to be alone. I never considered how one might not ever feel the things she had successfully outrun. Then I spent 2 years in a ravaging maelstrom of a relationship. When I finally emerged, I thought I should take a break. After this revelation, I promptly got into 5 brief consecutive entanglements. Each had a frantic tinge, like the last handful of popcorn you cram into your mouth after you decide to stop eating it. I realized that my resolution would have to be more intentional. Already, my life has opened like a mansion whose rooms had been locked. Now, there is so much more space in which to live. I anticipated that I would miss the thrill of seduction, but that urge has also come and gone, never sturging strong or long enough to compel me from observation to animation until today. The customs line is interminable, but I'm distracted entirely by the undulation of the line as it snakes forward, delivering my crush and me past each other by mere feet at regular intervals. Both of us studiously rotate between staring at our phones, squinting ahead at the front of the line, and posing in such subtle affectations that no casual observer would discern anything other than boredom or frustration in either of our comportments. It might seem arrogant for me to assume that my crush reciprocates my attention, but trust me that when you've been performing this choreography for more than 20 years, you know when your partner feels the music and when she doesn't. The first decade was spent being humiliatingly mistaken a good portion of the time while I cultivated this precise radar, but in the years since, it hasn't led me astray. The thrill, of course, resides in the slender possibility that temptation has passed. Soon after I got sober at 23, my sponsor told me I couldn't steal anymore. She probably would have told me this sooner if she'd known I was still stealing things, mostly books from the Barnes & Noble in Union Square and bags of food from the self-serve bins at the overpriced health food store on University, RIP Healthy Pleasures. But I'd never mentioned it until I happened to be on the phone with her as I walked to my building's laundry room and found that someone had left a stack of quarters on the table by the change machine. I can take them, right? I asked her. No, she take them, right? I asked her. No, she said, we don't steal. I felt awash in relief at this. I used to get a terrible wave of dread right before I stole, as if someone else was making me do it. I wasn't addicted to stealing. It was a habit I'd gotten into as an addict who was always broke. But necessity had been replaced by the inertia of habit. It hadn't occurred to me that I could give myself permission to stop. Incredibly, after I have navigated the swarmed airport, retrieved my suitcase from baggage claim, ridden the shuttle to the adjacent train station, deciphered the cryptic train tables and British accents, purchased my ticket from the reluctant kiosk, and arrived at the correct platform, there she is, the woman from the plane. She glances up, probably sensing my stunned stare, sees me, looks momentarily stunned herself, and then looks away. We don't make eye contact again, but stand a few yards apart on the platform, waiting for our train. I hold very still, as if it will quell the tumult inside me. I have fleeting, stupid thoughts, like, maybe it is fate. Who am I to defy the fates? Or maybe, in a foreign country, it doesn't count as violating my abstinence. I think of St. Augustine, though I find him simpering, and the pears he stole as a teen with his ne'er-do-well friends. Doing this pleased us all the more because it was forbidden, he wrote in his Confessions. Such was my heart, O God, such was my heart, which thou didst pity, even in that bottomless pit. I think of how, when I was a child, my appetites were so great that my parents used to sometimes refer to me as a bottomless pit. I loved my own undoing, wrote Augustine, and I do know what he meant, the ecstasy of yielding to the forbidden. The train finally pulls up to the platform, whipping my hair around my face. We board the same car from different doors. Again, I settle 4 or 5 rows ahead of her. My body feels rubbery with exhaustion, but buzzy, animated by the prospect that something is going to happen. Amazing, the resiliency of this excitement, as if I haven't lived through what happens countless times before. I haven't felt it in so long, this nervous attention to my body. I've always told myself that it is waking, this feeling, but is that right? Now it feels just a few clicks away from fear. At 40, while her interest in friendship grew increasingly compelling, Virginia Woolf wrote to a friend that sexual relations bore me more than they used to. I have come to the conclusion that love is a disease, a frenzy, an epidemic. Oh, but how dull, how monotonous, and reducing its young men and women to what abysses of mediocrity. How ironic that I have momentarily succumbed to the abyss of mediocrity at this particular moment, for I have come to London to follow the trail of my celibate role models. In a few days, I will leave London for Germany's Rhine Valley, where I will visit Hildegard von Bingen's Benedictine Abbey. Like Woolf, Hildegard lived a life devoted to her art. The German polymath was just as prolific as the modernist and called her own work the living light. She claimed visions from early childhood, though no one particularly cared until she was about my age. As soon as her direct line to God was recognized by the men of the church, she announced that God had commanded her, "Make known the wonders you live, put them in writing and speak." Convenient for an artist who would have had no other path to a life based in creative practice other than that prescribed by God. Like that of most nuns, the goal of von Bingen's celibacy was ostensibly to relate to God. How then, I keep wondering, did she write the first description of a female orgasm? How did she know the sense of heat in her brain, how the woman's sexual organs contract and all the parts that are ready to open up during the time of menstruation now close, in the same way as a strong man can hold something enclosed in his fist? Perhaps for her, erotic ecstasy was a metaphor for the spiritual rather than the inverse, as we like to assume. Or maybe she was just a lesbian feminist separatist before you could be such a thing, the original art nun. One of the early revelations of the past months has been that celibacy and ecstasy are not mutually exclusive. After close consideration, I determined in the first month that masturbation would not violate the terms of my abstinence. The ecstasy of orgasm was not the sort I needed respite from. My need for celibacy has more to do with performance than it does with pleasure, the ways I have molded myself around the desires of others. My practice of self-pleasure predates that of sexual performance. It's a relationship I formed with myself before I ever formed a sexual relationship with another person. It's hardly even lust that propels my masturbation. I've never been a light candles around the bathtub type of masturbator. I'm much more of an eat a bag of chips type of masturbator, a procrastinator. As there are plural celibacies, so there are plural ecstasies. The romantically interested person, the seeker of sexual intrigue, might be seen as embodying a form of Heideggerian ecstasy, wherein perception or consciousness is always split into subject and object. The heightened ecstasy of the perceiver who objectifies with desire is something else. We have an amorous narrative for this state and hormonal explanations for the emotional component, though it is quickly becoming clear to me that a person in that state of intrigue is no more in love with their subject than a wolf in love with a rabbit, a grouse with an acorn, a junkie with the familiar taste at the back of her throat. When I strip away the great swells of feeling that obscure it, I can see how those habitually compelled by the ecstasy of attraction are almost robotic in their pursuit, like sex Roombas. Having become an observer rather than a participant of this dynamic for the past 6 months, I have come to understand that it is not a compliment to be pursued by a sex Roomba. The starkness of this fact disturbs me, as if I have suddenly recognized the smell of ammonia, as if I have just realized that money is only paper. Now, when certain people flirt with me, it is so clear that they don't see me. They see only a source of what promises to slake their thirst, but never will. They are, as the etymology of ecstasy indicates, outside themselves, outside of the place where empathy resides. Of course, by they, I mean me, for most of my life. We have never been in this together. We have only each been alone in the same place with the same goal. As I count the dwindling stops until my destination and stare uncomprehending at the book in my lap, my nerves increase. I glance back over the heads of reading passengers and sleeping children, gently nodding with the motion of the train car. The stranger's face is tilted toward the window, outside of which a field and then a small pond glide by. But I see the flicker of attention to my movement and feel the hum of the invisible cord between us, its subtle electricity, though I sense that she will not be the one to act. I know how to do this. The right kind of question to break the silence, the conversation to follow, the casual invitation to meet up later. Especially when I was younger, I kissed a lot of strangers. In more recent years, I've collected friends that sat like simmering pots, maintaining the warm promise of consummation if I ever got hungry enough. But something is different, intercepting the usual broadcast like the song of a nearby radio station, snippets of a chorus that I begin to recognize. My excitement is a kind of anxiety. I am anxious because I do not want to consummate this flirtation. I know what lies at the end of the story, and it is either predictable or ruinous. I don't want to find out which. I want to exit this train and get a cab alone. I want to release myself from this nervous bondage. And then I realize that I can. I let the cord go slack. I let it go completely and feel her begin to drift away. I retrieve my attention from its locus 5 rows behind me and feel the shift inside as I return, my senses sharpened. It's as if I have removed a set of headphones from my ears and the music of my craving stops. Now I can hear the murmur of the other passengers in the train car and feel the churn of our motion against the tracks, the subtle rush of blood surging away from my heart into my hands. Here I am. Thank you.
tough act to follow. Can we please have some more applause for Melissa Febos? Thanks also to Courtney for a terrific introduction. Thank you very much. Courtney also is an amateur exorcist, so if you have any spirits that need to be gotten rid of, just chat with Courtney over there. And then, yes, so we're going to continue on. Next, we're going to hear from Cameron Awkward Rich. And to introduce Cameron, I'd like to invite Taylor Allison Lewis to the stage, please.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Taylor Allison Lewis, and I have the pleasure of introducing Cameron Awkward Rich. So I'm going to do just that. All right. Cameron Awkward Rich is the author of 2 collections of poetry, Sympathetic Little Monster and Dispatch. His creative work has been supported by fellowships from Cave Canem, The Watering Hole, and the Lannan Foundation. Also a scholar of trans theory and expressive culture in the US, Cameron earned his PhD from Stanford University's program in modern thought and literature. His more critical writing can be found in Signs, Trans Studies Quarterly, American Quarterly, and elsewhere, and has been supported by fellowships from Duke University's program in Feminist, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and the ACLS. His book, The Terrible We, Thinking with Trans Maladjustment, was published by Duke University Press in fall 2022. Presently, he is an assistant professor of Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. In his poem, Black Feeling from Dispatch, Cameron writes, "The truth is, most black folk look at you and see a woman. White people look at you and see a reckless boy. Either way, there you are, in the room, with your body." As a black trans man, as a writer, as someone in this room with this body, Cameron's defense of those of us who are still living has influenced my desire to articulate what is inexplicable, what it could mean to be black, to be trans, and to still be here. His vulnerability reminds me that it is okay to be made undone by the rooms we may find ourselves in, and certainly within the world we were born into. So without further ado, Cameron Awkward Rich.
Hi, I have a PowerPoint, so I'm just gonna make sure that it will work. Yeah, it's gonna work. Okay. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Taylor. It's a weird life to make little words and then see how they move inside of other people. So thank you. I'm gonna read 3 things, 2 regular length, 1 very long. And I'm gonna try not to banter because it would go weirdly. This one is called Long Distance. It's called something nearly unbearable, the room on your computer, inside of which the men shine with sweat and shea. They, the men, are passing another between them like a lit joint, though they the burning paper and he the lips. Plainly, we are in your bed, watching porn, though it's purely academic, everyone merely a student of pleasure. Except for the boy, the wet Kohn, who by now has opened his second toothless mouth, swallowing from both ends, his eyes wide, and then he's gone, vanished into the body's thicket, and so the men, though never touching, do. All 4 of us, one wooded quiet, carrying his cry. We take a screenshot to remember this. What are we trying to understand? In the morning, I'll fly home. It will be months and months until I am again marked with your scent. I'd given up, resign myself to the idea of desire, the body, my body, a locked door. Love, if that is your name, I'm a practiced hand. I'm good at waiting. And meanwhile, the sugar maples, miles of them, flushed and damp between us. Okay, this poem is sort of written in relation to this photograph, which is very hard to see. But it's kind of intentionally very hard to see. It's a photograph by the artist John Edmonds, and it was produced by way of the solarized print process, which is a photographic technique that requires extended exposure to light. And this poem is called Trans Study, Untitled for Facial Expression. Upon first glance, it is difficult to decipher a figure, much less a facial expression. Upon first glance, it is difficult, the figure. Upon first glance, there is no face. Upon first, undecipherable, the glance, it is difficult. It depends on who is looking. We might say, upon first glance, we are in a dark room. We are behind our eyelids in the room. We are looking in the dark. The figure before us is also behind the eyelids, their eyelids. It is as if neither we nor they are present to the other, though we are looking together in and from the dark. We look to work out the other's intentions. We cannot. We look. We breathe together inside the room inside. The figure, having been exposed, overexposed to light, has become like a shadow or a barely lit shape on a midnight lake. For the sake of simplicity, we could call the figure a man, but I will not. We are in the room that precedes all this, the cleavage of this from that. It goes first darkness, then form. Remember that. Try. If we look too long at the lake, what surfaces is the old thought, when I was a child, when I was a child. We are thrown back to before, not shame, but shame of shame. We become furious and wild-limbed and kind. We pass the claws between us, a rope tethering, taut. A poem, we've been taught, though we can't say where, should leave this part out. We should rush from room to bright room so that we can be surprised by what we find. But the figure is still in the dark. They require our stillness, our black breath. I am afraid, I say to no one, to be like this image, upon first glance, unreachable, exposed. When I was a child, there was a figure in the dark, a man. Let's call him that, a man. I was a question. I was a question he answered. I was a question he held and demanded my stillness. Part of me lives in that room still, though I left it with a new, wretched name. But, and I can say this now, he saw me, the man in the dark, when no one else could see me, when I was, in a manner of speaking, difficult to decipher, a darkness before form. He held me, stilled me. He brought me into the frame. We were two black men there, in the black, the close black, the black from which life relentlessly comes. The breath between us was cruel. But I could see him. I could see the sorrow, the rage, the calm water, the father raising his fist, the unnameable quiet of his face. Okay, so this is a long thing that I'm going to read to us. In the faculty group chat, it was revealed that Pauli Murray has become a quarter, a US quarter. So I decided that I should read this poem. For those of you who don't know, Pauli Murray was a kind of 20th century black, mixed race, priest, lawyer, civil rights kind of activist, a million different things, and I have been obsessed with them for the past 4 years, maybe more than that. And so this piece is a sort of long piece, which is a palinode, which means that it is a poem/essay that is retracting a kind of previous essay that I wrote about Pauli. So palinode begins with 2 epigraphs. The proximities of the archive disperse the feeling of otherwise being consumed by the present and its many emergencies. Jules Gill Peterson. Reading only with and for transsexuals, I read for my life. Jay Prosser. Dear Pauli, I've been trying to write about you for some years now and have not been able. Well, other people might say I have been. I've given talks, there's an essay under contract, but I haven't been able yet to say what I mean. Lately, each thing I do is a form of the epistolary, apostrophe, some particular impossible you. The problem is, of course, one of audience, address. I cannot have a single thought. From what I can tell, you didn't have that problem. You were, I think, able to hold something like a nation in your head. Still, it must have eventually driven you mad, from scene to scene, institution to institution, looking for felicitous language, the precise vocabulary, syntax for making clear what to you was always clear, that you were alive. Anyway, I've been having trouble lately. The sentences either do not come or lie flat or say only what is obvious to say. Life hangs beneath a question. Dear Polly, am I right to say that, for you, the poet was at best a kind of prophet? Not a fortune teller, but in the biblical tradition, someone who could sense the future looming in the present, who issues the warning, if we do not change our course, we will be and thus are already doomed. Dear Polly, in interviews, you say that writing was what enabled you to bear your life beneath the question. It was what you did, that is, when no other action was possible. A little valve for when the pressure built. Anger, otherwise, would kill you. When asked at 67, at the edge of your fifth career, if you would ever let yourself rest, you said, in short, I'd be dead if I did. In the essay, the one under contract, the one I am already ashamed of, I make arguments, or try to. First, I argue that you understood yourself as living somehow in the future. Ahead of myself is how you put it once, 21 years ahead. Second, I argue that this is a trans way of occupying time, living out the future in the present tense, embodying for others, for yourself, Ernst Bloch's not yet. It's easy to idealize, being imbued with the sheen of futurity, endless becoming, longing that propels us, etc. But it's terrible, you know. Or it is also terrible. People take up all kinds of postures toward the future. Hope is one. Dread, militarized fear. I write, if all goes well, to find out what I do not know. Dear Polly, before the war, you had been in love. Not just, that is, experiencing the feeling of love, but held inside of it. Held and then no longer held because love could not see you as you were, a man you tried for over a decade to become. Sex was a scene of your impossibility. People interpret this in all kinds of ways: false consciousness, schizophrenia, ego-dystonic lesbianism, transsexuality, the disease of reading, and sure, me too. In a prior scene, I am 13. I've just finished a novel, Middlesex. I am crouching on the blue carpet in my blue room. I am straining to sense how I might too have secreted inside the capacity to change. Dear Polly, about you, it was once reported that your errands were carefully planned so that you could travel in a circle, not wasting time. In the essay, I argue that, although by the late 1960s or so, you had fallen out of the future, taken up residence in the past-present tense, come to feel history more and more as a series of closed loops, we can sense, nonetheless, in your poems, your photographs, your strained sentences, your trans life preserved in the aesthetic, your still latent futures given form. Dear Polly, in 2011, in California, I rode my bicycle for miles to the office of a doctor whose name I do not any longer know. He gave me what you, nearly a century ago, had wanted with a kind of fervor I can never muster. I'm not saying it was easy. There had been psychologists and letters and prior attempts and protracted conflict and years and furtive transit and paperwork and endless deadening talk, but it was possible. Dear Polly, I encounter a thought that breaks a little more my heart. You say, finally, that race and sex are biologically permanent. You grow from a child to an adult, an alien may become a citizen, and so on. But where you have a permanent characteristic, it is on the basis of one's birth that one becomes a member of that caste. It is completely imposed upon one, and there is no way that one can escape. I don't know when this thought, the finality of it, seized you. Was it your admiration of Mary Daly, her writing, her beautiful tan? Was it that you could no longer bear hope's disappointment? Was it that you were, in some important way, already dead? All I know is that, by the end of your life, Having discovered no other way, you had become convinced that race, that sex were closed forms. Polly, listen, they aren't. It isn't. Dear Polly, if you were alive now, I suspect I wouldn't so admire you. Lawyer, priest, National Organization of Women, acquainted with the president's wife. But because you are dead, I do. Of course, if you were alive now, you wouldn't be, in every important way, you. I spend my whole life trying to convince my students of this. Our categories have histories, I say, gesturing wildly with my little nub of chalk. There, at work, I use words like contingency, discursive formations, rupture, and yet, today, walking with F around our Massachusetts town, I insist, as always, on a circular route. Coffee, then groceries, then flowers, for its tender efficiency. Oh, Polly, how can I help it? The first, the beautiful thought, you. Dear Polly, I have been wasting time. Doom is, among other things, why I'm here, trying to speak to you. Dear Polly, I guess the truth is that I am not brave, do not want to be brave. I want my classes, my students, my domestic poems. I want to move in small circles. I want 20 minutes in the morning, the blue couch, my blue room. Dear Polly, across the country, across the Senates and House chambers and governors' desks and Twitter feeds and liberal papers, some they is busy legislating sex, race, the people, the human, etc. as closed forms. They are busy, that is, making life impossible always in the name of life. I can offer endless, impersonal explanations, but I feel at first as numb hand, clenched thought, bird in the throat. What was it you said? Race is the atmosphere we breathed from day to day, the pervasive irritant, the chronic allergy, the vague apprehension that makes one uncomfortable, jumpy. Dear Polly, even now, I can't say what I mean. Dear Polly, I am writing to you because I cannot write. Everywhere there is language, enumerations of the problem, diagnoses, the problem beginning as far back as I can imagine, farther still. In class, I pace with my chalk. I circle the room, the words, e.g. neoliberalism, biopolitics, coloniality, modernity, the nuclear family form, and so on. Draw desperate, crooked lines. I say and say and say, and what for? Increasingly, I think there's only one word that might matter. No. Dear Polly, the more I look at you, the more I am overcome with an eerie feeling, a visceral near identification that seems, against my better judgment, that it might rescue me. I have become frankly fixated on this image of you who are prolific amidst Jim Crow, the fascist American mid-century, the Great Depression, your endless dislocation in pursuit of meaningful work, the atmosphere of anti-blackness, the deathly race-gender politics of the university, your loneliness, your unruly mind, the thwarting of your trans desires during a tipping point when sex change was heralded as newly possible, fixated on the question simply of how you thought under those conditions, how you endured the present tense. Dear Polly, no, 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 no. Dear Polly, I'm standing before a crowd of people I admire, talking incoherently about you, my pursuit of you. What everyone will remember is that I am lonely, or that I have formal questions about loneliness, about whether it is a feeling that produces continuity, a desire for continuity, where there might more ethically be rupture. All day, they come up to me to report that they like what I said about loneliness, which makes me suspicious. Am I lonely? Am I lonely? My days are crowded with other people. Dear Polly, I look for as long as I can stand at one particular image. You as young man, you as Pete, you as self-proclaimed vagabond in a leather coat. I go tender for this image. You are young, little brother, so young. This is before Bellevue and the rest home, before the arrests and the intake forms and your desperate lines, before you spread beneath the knife in search of hidden organs, before the first end of love, before you are refused and refused and refused and made, I can't help but think, into the bravest thing, black girl, black woman. Once, after a talk, someone asked if I thought the name, your name, Pete, was a biblical reference. Peter, Paul, etc. Honestly, it hadn't occurred to me. Dear Polly, as far as I know, there is no tense, not in English, to describe the shape of time you help me see. The was will be, the salted circle, the still not yet. Dear Polly, your name for her, your first great love, was Pan, Pete and Pan, the boy who would not grow up. The boy who returns and returns to the same house, the same window, though nothing ever is the same. Polly, the truth is, after all this time, I want him simply to have lived. I think this means, shamefully, inconceivably, I want to live, to have lived. And though no word was uttered above the tumult of advancing tide, you came uncalled and placed your hand in mine. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Cameron. Can we please have another big round of applause for Cameron Awkward Rich? Amazing. And finally, we're going to hear from Ilana Savdie. And I'd like to invite to the stage one of her students, Nestor Felipe Chavez, to introduce her. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Felipe Chavez. I'm from Colombia, based between Bogota and New York. So Ilana Savdie was raised in Barranquilla, Colombia, and Miami, and is currently based in New York City. She received her MFA from Yale School of Art in 2018, and a BFA from Rhode Island School of Design. Savdie is recognized for her surreal and electrifying beads works, acrylic and oil paintings which invert traditional associations of figuration and composition. Her distinctive style employs the transformative power of performance, a vehicle to displace control, embrace the grotesque, and dismantle the ideas of binary identity relating to migration, foreignness, and familiarity. In 2023, Savdie presented her first museum solo exhibition, Radical Contractions, at Whitney Museum of American Art, which I was there and I fell in love with her work and I started to follow that work that really fascinated me, and that's how I started to focus and follow all of her work, going to her solo show in Paris, which I was in shock. And then after seeing her, before that I saw her bartending in an art fair, which I really appreciate her kindness and to share her knowledge in little comments with her. Then her work is included in the permanent collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Hammer Museum of Los Angeles, Museum of Fine Art Boston, Montreal Museum of Fine Arts Montreal, the Jewish Museum New York, of Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, Santa Barbara Museum of Art, Santa Barbara, the Rakowski Collection Dallas, the Burger Collection in Hong Kong. I'm in her workshop called The Monster Body, and I deeply admire her body of work, and I'm very proud of the carnivalesque way she's bringing Colombia to the context, and being here a Latina is what really caught my attention. And what I really appreciate is me as a Colombian, not knowing, being in the art industry with no background as an art, as I didn't study art, so seeing that I'm as a Colombian don't know anything, and I started to know things about her from abroad, from comments, is what really caught my attention and made me more proud. And also letting to, like, knowing that she's Colombian, Latina in the US base made me super happy. So here's Ilana Savdie.
Thank you so much for that. Just bear with me for a second. I'm going to try to get my thing up there. Can we turn this on? Oh. Okay, wait, sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay. Can you guys hear me? Hi. Okay, I did not expect to follow these two, so maybe temper expectations a little bit. I'm gonna, and I'll try my best to keep it within the time, but I'm not great at that either. So I'm just gonna quickly introduce this talk with a quote from Gloria Anzaldúa, who it's a quote that lives on my studio wall and has for years. It's from her book Borderlands. Anzaldúa writes, "I want the freedom to carve and chisel my own face, to staunch the bleeding with ashes, to fashion my own gods out of my entrails." So I grew up in Barranquilla, which is in Colombia, which is home to the second biggest carnival in the world. And as a result, one is constantly surrounded by the sort of ethos of the carnival, and that sort of inherently has spilled into my work over the past couple of years. So I pulled up these pictures because I found them on my computer this week. And this is literally in my elementary school for my gym class. And this is me, not on Halloween, just like on a regular day. So this is just what Barranquilla is, just so you can kind of have that in mind as I carry you guys with me through. I'm gonna talk about some of the themes that are sort of through lines in all of my work, but I'm just gonna focus on the most current body of work because of the time constraint. So one of the major through lines of this work is themes around the carnivalesque, and specifically the sort of release of impulses that threaten social order, and the kind of reversal of roles inherent in the carnivalesque, not just in Colombia, but just worldwide. And the ways in which exaggeration of the body as a form of mockery and mockery as a form of protest play a fundamental role in some of the figures in the carnival and some of the sort of performances within it. All themes that I've associated, and many have associated with queer history and modes of queering. A major through line in the work has been themes around the trickster as an agent of change. So I looked to both folklore and nature to find that in varying degrees. So thinking about trickery through color, costuming, through theatricality as a glamour for modes of resistance, the ambiguous and amorphous as ways to resist categorization, and in nature, trickery as instinctive modes of survival and adaptation. So thinking about camouflage as a survival tactic and camouflage as a predatory method of entrapment. And then embodying the trickster the most acutely is the parasite. So I work with the parasite quite often, and I think about the ways in which it sort of insists on impurity, imposition, bad boundaries, and the way it forces the host to change from within. Thinking of it as an agent of imposition and occupation, and at the same time also an agent of symbiosis, allyship, intersubjectivity. So really thinking about this kind of form organism that holds so many different things at once. And finally, a key thing that guides a lot of the decisions in my work is themes around the monstrous, which is why I'm here teaching a class on the monstrous body.
I have a strong relationship to the kind of tensions between attraction and repulsion. I have to like fight the urge to keep looking here because I'm not talking to the microphone. So I'm just looking at my little screen right here. Yeah, so building positive associations with the disgusting, but really thinking about the pleasure I take in shuffling and fusing disparate components together, and how that relates to the kind of refusal to be whole, which is something that I continuously associate with the monstrous. And considering the whole as a disordered whole and how it comes to take on the image of its parts. But really the monstrous is a way that I arrive at abstraction, and abstraction is a way that I arrived at the monstrous. So there's this kind of material and sort of, there's a kind of interplay there. So generally themes around my work, themes in my work are dealing with performance, transgression, identity, and power as mediated through the body. And thinking about survival, adaptation, resistance, and looking to those in both folklore and in nature. And really thinking about the predator-prey, parasite-host, but also thinking about hero-villain, oppressor-oppressed, like these kind of dichotomies that can also be addressed through materially, through chaos and control, pleasure, disgust, the part and the whole, the verity and the artifice. So thinking about how the work can then disrupt notions of binaries as fixed. So this is a picture of the wall in my studio. It's a sort of ever-evolving living organism. I very much relate to the world through image. I'm not holding a parasite in my hand. I'm not touching these things. I'm relating to them through image, through microscopic photography, through things I've gathered for many years. And I gather incessantly collecting screenshots, and sometimes the research is intentional, sometimes it's inadvertent. But I very much have to deal with it as a tactile thing, so I print these out and kind of shuffle them around and try to make sense of what it is that that I'm responding to. And so this becomes often starting off points for the work. So I'm showing you guys here a kind of collection of things that have led to this drawing. I looked to very disparate parts of art history. I looked to medical illustrations. I also very often look to this mask, which, as you can see here, I have tons of, and many, many walls full of them in my studio. It's a mask from the Colombian Carnival, from a figure called the Marimonda, which is this figure that was originally intended as this kind of this figure that mocked the sort of oppressive political elite. It's supposed to be a combination of a monkey and an elephant, and it wears like it comes with like a suit and tie, but and it does this dance that like mimics the Marimonda monkey, which is the name of a monkey, and it's meant to be this kind of I see it as a sort of exaggerated body, amalgamated different bodies that are used as a sort of form of mockery, and that mockery becomes a kind of mode of protest. So I've used the features of the Marimonda very often in my work, and they tend to be the only facial features that I use in my work, so they kind of locate abstract forms into figuration sometimes. So that piece led to this piece, which is titled Aggressive Mimicry. Aggressive mimicry is a sort of wolf in sheep's clothing concept in which a predator can camouflage as its prey. So just to quickly show you guys, because it's not quite visible in a lot of these images, I work with a combination of a lot of different materials, primarily beeswax, oil, and acrylic paint. And the beeswax is layered, it's painted on and layered so that the quick drying gesture of painting with melted beeswax can then congeal and be layered onto this texture, and it sort of creates this disruption of kind of surface treatments in the work.
But yeah, generally themes that I'm continuing to investigate continue to be located in the body, and I'm generally questioning, you know, what it means to have a body, whose body counts politically, how do we perform it, how do we perform having a body with all its inherent failures, and where does one end and another begin, which was a question that was kind of often coming up, especially during COVID when we were really becoming threats to each other. So I'm sorry in advance for these images. I'm so used to them now. Thinking a lot about formlessness, thinking about sightless occupation, what it means to try to locate home and history and heritage in the body. I look to forms of amoebas and different organisms that shapeshift, and try to think about what it means to disrupt our sense of equilibrium and what it means to invade and inhabit another body. I'm going really quickly, but just, you know, stop me if you have questions. And then I very often think about how we can kind of expand a genre and then expand it, and how elastic is it, and how far can we expand it before it collides into the next, and what is revealed through that collision. So often I look to horror and comedy, and thinking about misdirection as a means of resolving tension in the work. I'm very interested in caricature as a way of understanding the elasticity of bodies, and how the grotesque can exist in a gesture. So I look often to the like 90s cartoons and Ren and Stimpy and such. How the grotesque can exist in line is really interesting. And I've been introducing into my research over the past couple of years the theatricality of religious painting, specifically in the Baroque, and thinking about just the extraordinary abundance of disorienting detail in religious painting, the theatricality of the good and evil binary, and the theatricality of dissension and ascension. And then I'm very interested in these moments of transition. So this is a piece by Rubens, and this is a detail of the kind of in-between moment of good and evil. So what does that look like? I've been also contrasting that kind of abundance and splendor of the Baroque with artists like Goya, whose drawings specifically his drawings of war address a very sort of matter-of-factness of life and death, and the kind of horror and banality of war. So thinking about the kind of theatricality of retellings and reanimating of dead things, and the kind of uncanny horror of all that. So this piece is called Imperial Diet y Otros Demonios, Imperial Diet and Other Demons, from 2021. Also thinking very much about the choreography of bodies, looking at things really formally and clinically, so I can kind of remove my own impositions of good and evil, and then really tying threads between the different things that I've gathered. So in this case, the image on the left is Massacre of the etching called Massacre of the Innocents from around 1600. The image on the right, it's people storming the Capitol on January 6th. Both images of people trying to climb a wall. So I'm thinking about these two images. I made this piece titled The Enablers, an Adaptation, and really thinking about, in this case, what if that wall was a curtain? What if those figures were acrobats? What if this was a reenactment of something? And what would get lost and what would be gained through that reenactment? So thinking about how history is retold and what shifts in that retelling. This piece is titled Queen Breeders, also from 2021. I was looking at Bruegel the Elder's beekeeper drawings and etchings, and realized that the medieval beekeeper is a great example of the banal and the sinister colliding. And then also found in my research that people are remaking those uniforms and just wearing them and taking pictures of it. So I'm in love with that. So I've actually been using that as a character in the work quite often. So this is a detail from that painting. And then a lot of these works were part of a solo show I had in 2021 in LA at Kohn Gallery. And the title of the show is Entrañadas, which is kind of a play on the word entrails in Spanish. And immediately after, I was offered another show, so I kind of had to like run back into the studio. And I started to hone in on some of the aspects of comedy and failure that were kind of part of the themes I was working with, and thinking about those as modes of radicality, and thinking specifically about the characters that work within that, like the jester, the witch, the parasite, the clown, and just thinking through failure as this sort of refusal and rejection, and arriving at a kind of monstrosity through that, a refusal of social norms, and specifically that as thought of through the flop in comedy, and the flop in comedy is being used as a new way to find success. So how to work with rather than against failure, and that started to inform some of the decisions I was making around the paintings. And so this piece is titled La Llorona por detrás, which it translates to the crying woman from behind, but it's the lyrics from a really misogynistic song from the carnival. And this is now part of the collection at the Perez Art Museum in Miami. This piece is titled Feast of Fools. Both of those are 2022. The Feast of Fools, if you're not familiar, was a Christian tradition in the 12th century, where allowances were made for mimicry and mockery of the church, but by the church. So there was a sort of degree of debauchery and social norm, like inversion of social norms that were like built into and dictated by the church. And it was meant to invoke the biblical principle that God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. I loved that. So that informed this piece, which is now part of the collection of the ICA Miami. This piece is titled The Mouth Briefly Shut Itself. This one's titled The Husband Stitch, which is based on Carmen Maria Machado, a short story of the same name. I'm not going to talk about that one because there's a book back there with that short story, so you guys can read it. But it was one of 3 paintings that came from the same composition but were approached differently, and all titled after that same short story. And they made up part of a solo show I had at White Cube in London in 2022, titled In Jest. So just an example of some of the works on paper that I showed you guys at the beginning. Those have been a fundamental part of the practice, and I talk about them as a sort of alphabet that leads to the language. And I haven't had a show where I show paintings without drawings. They feel really fundamental. So this is sort of where they're always monochromatic, and this is sort of where I figure out, make decisions around mark making, make decisions around the joints in the work, and when one thing becomes the next. And color plays no part in that at first. So then I can kind of move on to the painting and have painting really make its own decisions, disrupt anything that was done in the drawing. And it's kind of that interplay and that disruption that's a huge part of the work. Very soon after that show, December of 2022, I was offered a show at the Whitney in their lobby gallery, which opened in July of 2023. So I just immediately had to go back to work. So if you see me exhausted, it's because I'm still exhausted. And the space is relatively small for museum space, so it kind of calls for, and the really tall ceiling, so it kind of calls for this very singular move. So I ended up making all new work for it. I made a series of 6 10-foot paintings, and the idea was to kind of be surrounded by this work and to really feel like there was a kind of religious theatricality that was sort of happening at you. And it felt really important to keep that series together, so I really just kind of churned them out. And this was a wall that kind of interrupted the viewing of that work when you walked in, so it was the first time I was able to actually introduce a show with drawings rather than have them be sort of secondary to the paintings. And they're sitting on a backdrop that is one of the images that I most work with, which is parasitic larva. So there was really no ignoring the relationship that I had to these images when looking at this show. And this is the back of that wall, so it really shows this kind of curved form that we worked into the show, which is sort of reminiscent of the curvatures in the work. I'm I'm trying to go a little bit more quickly. This piece is titled Pico y Placa, and this is a detail from that piece. And I was really working with a lot of portals, but the very cartoonish version, I mean, I don't know what other version there is, but a really cartoonish version of a portal that's really just a singular form. And so they're showing up in a few of these works. This piece is titled Pinching the Frenulum, which is that part right here, the tiny part in your mouth. Felt like a really absurd way to sort of assert control over a body. And there's, just to really quickly show, there's a lot of sketching and there's a lot of steps that go into the work before I actually make it to the painting. But in the actual painting, I start with these pores that are quite disruptive and they shift completely the original intention of the work. So this is a detail of this piece where you can kind of see how some of those pores have kind of shifted the sketch. But this is an iPhone photo that I inserted in like 20 minutes before this talk started because I was like, I think I'll just show it. And it's just, this is what it looks like when I actually start, where there's absolutely no real plan. And that then dictates the rest of the pieces, just it becomes about responding to these moves. So it really lets the paint make decisions that I can't quite assert over it. This piece is titled Baths of Synovia. Synovial fluid is the collection of fluid confined within a joint space. So it's really all, titles are coming from clinical terms for within the body. And this is a detail of that piece. Another detail, it shows a portal again. This piece is titled Helminth. I'm just gonna go a bit more quickly. This is called Tickling the Before and After. And that title, this is a detail from that piece. That title was in part inspired by a line in an Audre Lorde poem, and I'm gonna read you that little section even though I'm over time. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, for those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once before and after. So again, if I look really tired, it's because immediately after that, I started working on what is the solo show I have in Paris that is up right now. It's at the White Cube Paris space. And so for that work, I started to focus, still within a lot of these themes, but started to focus on the sort of spectacle and the figure of the hero that emerges from it. Or the sort of idealized hero that materializes through social manipulation. So I'm really interested in the vulnerability of machismo that leads to this figure and the kind of tropes that come with its idolization. So that really dictated a lot of this new body of work. So this piece is called Paper Planes. And then just as a lead up to the next piece, another kind of amalgamation of images that made up this piece. I was looking at H.R. Geiger's illustrations of spines and Yoshitoshi print of two figures intertwined. Yoshitoshi's an artist I look to very often, 19th century woodblock artist from Japan. Wrestler competitions, snakes giving live birth, which indicates that they have a greater sense, a greater defense mechanism. I look to those quite often, so they show up in the work a lot. And that led to this piece, which is entitled Spinal Sheds, A Desperate Glory. So it's really thinking about themes around protection, real or diluted. So there's a lot of different types of armor and shelling and skins that kind of show up in this work. And really this one sort of thinking about the spine as a symbol of courage. This piece is titled Like a Devil Sick of Sin, which comes from Wilfred Owen's poem about the sort of brutality of war and delusion of glory. These are some small works from the show. In Your Vast and Ancient Sorrow That Was My Home, which comes from an Eileen Myles poem, and Scattered Signals of the Upright. Both small works, like 34 by 24. And then I made a new body of work of monotypes, which I had never done before. So it's my first foray into printmaking, and I had so much fun with it. and so this show, I showed these for the first time in this show. And then this is a really big painting, so I kind of wanted to show it with scale, but it's 3 panels. It's titled Muecas, which is Spanish for like making faces, making funny faces. And at the same time, I was working on a presentation of 5 paintings for this larger group show. It's a small presentation for a larger group show at the Jewish Museum, which is entitled Overflow, Afterglow, New Works in Chromatic Figuration. So I'm just gonna show you 2 of those and then we're done. So this painting I made a painting that was made after looking at a video of this walrus trying to stand and continuously failing. And I couldn't find the video, but this is a screenshot of it that I took. And there was this sort of massiveness as it rose and fell that felt very much like this fallen warrior. And then I was looking at intertwining forms of slugs mating and the sort of serpentine forms of monsters in horror films, and really just thinking about entangling bodies together. And that led to this piece entitled The Old Lie, Dulce Es, which comes from the same Wilfred Owens poem. So I've been thinking a lot about, with this work and with the work from the Paris show, about ideas around nationalism and heroism and glory, and what does it mean to die or kill for land, and for the maintaining of borders, and how does that evolve into the tales we tell each other. And lastly, this is a piece called Game, and it was thinking about the trap and the trophy. So it was inspired by looking at Dutch still lives of dead game, and the name comes from just thinking about the game of playing with dead things, and I imagined like using the string that hangs up the dead game in these paintings as like the puppet string that sort of reanimates them. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, we're going to do a quick Q&A with our speakers and readers. So, Cameron, come on up. We're live streaming this, so can you wait to ask your questions until Fatima or Sarah come to you with a microphone so our listeners at home can hear their questions? All right, that's it.
Hi, thank you to all 3 of you for such wonderful presentations. I really enjoyed myself. My question is for Ilana. I'm wondering if you could speak in greater detail about the pouring process and kind of what that looks like and how the work emerges from that process.
Sure, yeah, so there's a really intricate, like I said, even more so than the detail I could get into here, there's a really intricate process of sketching and planning that goes behind each work, and a lot of collaging and gathering. So it's really important to me that the materiality of paint kind of is allowed to be a player in the game, basically. And so, so I do a lot of masking to kind of treat the canvas differently throughout. So I section off areas and treat them differently, and then I'll do, on the ground, I'll do these sort of pours, and I'm working with water tension, allowing the kind of glacial flowing of water and paint to, and it's quick drying paint, it's acrylic, so it really will hold its form. And kind of, I know I'm being really esoteric in how I'm describing it, but it's really hard to describe without showing it. But it really, it allows me to disrupt the original process. It allows then for, it really just undoes the sketch. And then I have to go back in and then make decisions about what I'm holding on to and what I'm letting go of. And so it basically like invites failure into the process. in a much stronger way. And then there's this kind of interplay between me and the material, and I'm constantly going back and forth to sort of assert myself. Yeah. If that makes sense.
This question is for Ilana too. Could you tell me what medium you use in your drawings? That's one question. And then my other question is, how long does it take you to do a large painting?
So the drawings are usually pen and a high flow acrylic, just like a very watered down acrylic. And that's just because I'm really intimidated by ink. And it's quicker, but and then what was your other question? How long? Oh, and how long? It takes me about, I think once I start the painting, about a month. The planning and the sketching takes sometimes 2 weeks. Sometimes it'll just take a day, depending on how much it just kind of flowed out of me. But generally about 1 to 2 weeks for sketching, and then a full month to make the painting. But I have to work on many of them at the same time, because there's drying times so I'm kind of going between 2 or 3 paintings at once.
Thank you to all of you. That was really beautiful from all three of you. I appreciate it. And I noticed, I can't remember your name, the artist, the painter? Ilana. I noticed that you drew a really clear parallel between the culture and the place that you grew up in and your work. And I'm wondering if the two writers could do that for us as well, if there is one or if there isn't one.
Draw the connection between our work and the place that we're from?
Yeah, the place and the culture that you're from, how does that affect or not affect your work? How do you embrace it, reject it, integrate it, not integrate it?
Yeah. I mean, I think I could talk about that for a really long time. But I think the first thing that comes to mind is how, I think when I started writing, I sort of prioritized. I felt uncomfortable using images that felt natural to me, and I sort of overvalued invention, a different kind of invention, or sort of borrowing from places, because I didn't really understand my relationship to the place I was from. And it was when I grew up on the Cape, and so when I started borrowing from the image systems and sort of sensory detail bank of the place that I was from, that my work became worth a damn. It really wasn't any good until I started doing that. It was sort of a revelatory moment of inflection in my practice. And since then, I'll say just the longer that I make art, the deeper my understanding of that connection is. And I think of it not just in terms of geography or sort of present culture, but lineage in the most capacious form, right? And even, the new book, The Dry Season, is very much about sort of the most capacious definition of lineage I've ever sort of set down, just sort of looking for ancestors who modeled the sorts of things I've discovered in isolation, and trying to sort of draw a family tree that's transhistorical.
Yeah, I think I would say something very similar about what I have been up to, obviously, with this poly thing. That I think, I don't know. I think that it is true that as a Black American who grew up in kind of predominantly white spaces, and as a trans person who did not know that there was such a thing as trans history until I was an adult, right? I think that the question of where I am from and what home is and what lineage means, I think I have in my writing life always been trying to piece that together, right? It's not obvious to me. It's not obvious to me where it is that I'm from, and I think that some of that is, you know, the kind of like willed historical production of a severance of Black and also queer and trans people from history. And part of the project of being a reader and a writer is to recreate that for oneself, and it's like a great gift, right? It's a gift and it's a mandate to invent for oneself the forms and the places and the people that populate one's life. So yeah, I think that that's what I would say. I don't think that I really draw on like, you know, images of suburban Pennsylvania, for example. But the experience of growing up in suburban Pennsylvania and feeling like I was the only thing like me certainly informs the practice of being a writer who is always reaching for somebody else, you know? Yeah.
Okay, let's call it a night. Big round of applause for Melissa, Cameron, and Ilana. Thank you very much. The person who bore the large print of Melissa's story, could you please return that on your way out if we appreciate it? I can't remember who it was. Also, be sure to come back tomorrow for our final faculty talk of our second annual Queer Week featuring Celeste Lacine and Andrea Lawler. We can't wait. So Cameron and Melissa will be signing books at the back. Check out the gallery, check out the bookstore, and have a great night. Thanks for coming, and thank you again to Melissa, Cameron, and Ilana.